Welcome back to episode 3 of the BetterMen Project. It's Colin Stevens here with Dr. Jason Farrah.
What's up, everybody?
Excited to be back with you guys.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in. We've got a great episode ahead of us. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to add value to all of you all that are listening. We're trying to open up some real conversation about some of the things that go on with men, how we can learn and grow and become better men. And so today we're talking about what it is to be a real man.
A real man.
A real man. And so with this little project that we have, Jason and I took some time to go through our own minds, right, and write some stuff down. So we're gonna play a little game here. We're gonna play a little back and forth of 5 topics, 5 things that come to your mind when you think about a real man, and we'll bounce things back and forth. But what's interesting to me about even this topic is we are living in confused times, and from everything that we see on the internet, from everything that we've seen as we've been raised, things are always changing in our society, growing, changing, regressing at times, whatever you want to call it. Things are moving, and so it's this is a topic that while we'll try to stay clear and on point, it could get messy.
It's a messy topic, right? I mean,
and so I'm excited about this conversation,
dude. I am pumped.
So look, with that, what's the first thing, Jason, that comes to your mind?
Oh, you're gonna shoot it to me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So Colin came up with this pretty cool exercise, and it was nice to kind of separate, think on it on our own, and then get back together. And I'm looking forward to that. It was surprisingly hard.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was for you, but for me, I was like, I thought I knew. I thought I had this mental image of it, and then to articulate it, I was like, good Lord. I mean, this is actually pretty tough. You want to get it right. And then you don't, I don't know. Like you said, there's so much conflicting information or lack of information, a vacuum, if you will. Well, I mean, the first thought that came to my mind was, I've heard it in movies, I've seen it in war references, seen people talk about it, and I just wrote down the phrase "mind the gap." And to me, it was this role of a man, and it's not that a woman can't, but if a real man, to me, is a protector. And I was thinking of this military phrase where I don't know exactly what it means, honestly, but to me, and from my recollection of movies and wherever I get this, or I'm getting this from, it was like, there has to be the last, the defense of last resort, or there's this gap, or you have to. It's kind of like David Goggins, who's going to carry the boats, who's going to protect the army in the foxhole and watch the gap, and you got to stand in the gap and face the oncoming
onslaught of life.
Yeah. And then a lot of what, and I had to kind of I realized as I was thinking through this, a lot of what my frame of reference now is this much later in my life is as a father. And in a real man, a father can be a real man and should be a real man. But, it's not that you suddenly become a man when you become a father. You become a man when you're born with an XY set of chromosomes. But but nonetheless, one example would be maybe, for instance, that I feel like a man's role, and women do this too, by the way. And the funny thing is that these roles it's very subtle nuance where these roles kind of will mesh. And so men are very different than women, but they're very similar to women too. It's a bizarre situation. So we're differentiating. But then once I did this exercise, and by the way, hopefully we'll get into this later. I just, for sake of a experiment, I ran some of the stuff by my wife to and it was fascinating how these things will overlap. But at the ends, at the extremes, there's very big differences, and those little pockets of difference that are then maybe you think in the x-axis, we're all the same except way out here. And then in the y-axis, well, how different are we once you get out here? Well, we're way different. So they're little subtle nuances. They're big and they're deep, and they create big differences. Jordan Peterson talks about this a little bit in his work as in a PhD in psychology and researching that. But at any rate, building this hedge around your family. Certainly, a woman does it too. Predominantly does a lot of the early child care and things like that, and the love and attention, and the intelligence she brings, and the running of the family along with the man. Again, there's a lot of overlap here. I'm not saying that they don't do these things, but as I see it, mind the gap protector, building this hedge around your family once you have a family, or your people, or the people that you work with, or the people that you associate with. So that was my first one. What was your first one?
Yeah. So my first one is strong. And
that was kind of one of mine too.
Yeah, strong physically, emotionally, and relationally. Right? So strong inside and out. This is something that we've talked about a lot,
Strong
right?
inside and out.
Because we've seen...
That's our motto.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of... I remember growing up, maybe in high school, and seeing the guy who... maybe I was a freshman in high school, and seeing the senior who just lifted weights every day.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, wow, that guy is strong. Do I have to be that? And so I think we often get into this comparison of what strong is. Mm-hmm. To me, strong physically is not a bodybuilder. Right? I mean, and no knock to bodybuilders. That's their craft, and so they're doing the best they can.
It can be that,
sure.
But it's not exclusively
exactly.
that, right?
And so for us to be strong, to me, means to be able to be durable, to be able to take a hit, to be able to have enough strength about your body that you can withstand a hit. Mm-hmm. And so the same thing inside, emotionally fit, emotionally strong. Like if we are men, if we're not boys anymore, if we're men, we have to be emotionally fit and emotionally strong. That means that we can take a hit, right? And it doesn't knock us off course to where we're, a mess and aren't able to take care of the things that we're supposed to take care of. And then strong relationally, I think, is key, because life is about relationships, and
it's fundamentally about relationships,
right?
Absolutely.
And so if we can be strong in our relationships, durable and able to outlast and withstand the storms of life, then I think that that's a man that I'm like, dang, I want to be that. You know?
Right. Well, I like that one, Colin, because. I like that one probably because I see some parallels with my first one. I mean, just to be honest, but that's also kind of neat too. So just to unpack that a little bit more, like if you're a protector and you're going to mind the gap and you're going to build what you would need to be strong, right? And it's interesting. I heard this quote from Jordan Peterson again. This is like the Jordan Peterson hour or something. But he has a lot to say about this that I think has resonated with men over the last 5 years, especially, at least I've noticed, because there's this void, and the void that he talks about is a sense that women are kind of born knowing what to do, and we'll unpack this more perhaps, but just for the sake of conversation, and men have to learn what to do, and I think, and I've not gone real deep in terms of what he thinks that means, but to me. And I used to say this a lot as a physician, my role as a physician, and still say this a lot in my role as a physician. But I noticed that men were much less attentive to their health and much less dialed into their health. And for every one guy came in that would come into an appointment with questions written down, insights, understanding of his own health regimen, his medications, what he had to do, the issue that we were talking about, there were, 100 men that did not. And that would say, oh, my wife does that. Oh, my wife takes care of that. Right.
Sure.
Right. So so for me, it was like, if you're growing up and it's a fact, XY chromosome here, XX chromosome here. When women, reach the age of, menarche, where they'll start to menstruate, right? And that's early on. that's a big deal. Can you imagine having to deal with a monthly cycle and the changes?
No, thank you.
Right? Yeah, and women will say that. They'll say, "Yeah, we freaking hate it." Like, but it's a reality nonetheless, and we're thankful for it insofar as it's women are the source of life. Women are freaking amazing, but they really are amazing. But so if you're 9 years old, 10, 11, up to 12 years old, it's a really young age. And if you want to think about this, right, the massive leap that you have to take to go from, as a species, for our species at least, our mammalians, humans, from the time you're born and just 9 years, everything else that we do and how slow we mature compared to other animals, and then you're going to have this massive reproductive responsibility on you, maintaining your body, understanding the bleeding and the menstruation and the changes in the hormones and developing breasts and all these other things, the bone, all these physical developments. So if that's going to happen, and men aren't able to, or don't go through the same thing, all that stuff has to be sped up. Meaning, relative to men, physiologically, those things will have to happen faster. And so it was always my theory and thought that, well, no wonder women are dialed into their health more than men. They have to be.
They're more in tune with their bodies because they create life and then sustain life with their bodies.
And they do so, they physiologically are able to do so at a very young age. And so then you look at all 9-year-olds. Okay, 9-year-old boy, 9-year-old woman. What has a woman been doing since 9 years old? Well, she's been dealing with the reality of a monthly menstrual cycle. Boys are just like, I'm going to go play in the backyard, right?
Sure.
No, it's not that women don't play and do those things too, but I mean, that's a big deal, right? And so to me, that really resonated, was like, men need to be taught what to do. And even more important, that you need things like the BetterMen Project.
100%.
And the other folks that are in the space and working through this with men, because men aren't taught that. Then you think about it from the anthropological lens. And I'm not criticizing anybody, but it's the reality that if you looked at the 1930s and 1950s and compared it to now, for instance, and you see the shift of many more homes without fathers, and I'm not blaming any one person. It just is the reality, right? And then who's teaching these men that have to be taught? They come genetically encoded with this vulnerability that they need to learn. Women seem to already know, in large part, and because they know if they're around other women are more interested in relationships than men. Men are more interested in things, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing, but it's a very difficult place to be. So you got to have that. So in lieu of that, you have a vacuum, and in the place of a vacuum, I'm finally getting around to my point here, is that you're going to fill it with whatever source you can fill it with. And if you don't have a father in the home, or you don't have a father that hasn't been taught himself, you might think of strong as only physically strong. So this is what I really wanted to talk to you about, was you've been in the space a while. You've been thinking about this a while, and and that's fantastically articulated. I'm wondering, do you think that men in general, because I know I did, thought of strong as literally just how much weight I could bench, or there's that temptation to get on steroids?
If you can win a fight, if you can, everything is physical, right? If you're strong, it has to do with your physicality,
right?
Which, if you look at the greatest leaders that we have in our country's history, most of them haven't been weightlifters. I mean, the only one that even pops in my mind, on a political side of things, is right now RFK. But
he is pretty. He seems to be a pretty fit guy.
But gosh, what's Arnold Schwarzenegger? He was a bodybuilder and now he's a politician.
Yeah,
like the strength. Man, I don't know where that narrative came from, but it seems like so many of us just bought into it. And maybe it's because physical strength is actually easier to develop than emotional strength, than
mental strength, or it was a false narrative, or it was the easy biological cop out.
But I think somewhere down the line there has been this thing that women are this, men are this, women are this, men are this, and while there's some truth to some of that, there's a lot of generalizations that screw us up and think that, look, we're talking about what it is to be a real man, and I'm wearing a pink shirt today.
Yeah.
Right? And so there may be some men that are watching that like, men don't wear pink. Only girls wear pink. Only women wear pink. Right. Or purple, or the colors that are associated with what girls and women wear.
But you're right, and I categorically agree with you. I'm going to push back a little bit, only because the first model of men are only this and women are only this that went through doesn't work. I agree. Then to say that, then to call that out, to identify it is true. But what has happened for me is that has left me with more questions, and questions are better than answers because they lead you to truth. So what I've been wrestling with lately is realizing that how much men and women are similar, but
still different.
But it's different, and but that is so important.
Absolutely.
And it's in the gray area. It's in the subtle nuances, and that's what I love about. Okay. For instance, you might say, okay, Jason, you just mentioned about the change in fatherless homes, and well, why did that occur? And there's lots of things, but if people look back at the 1930s, okay, so the 1950s, and you think of Beaver Cleaver and that era, and in the oppressive patriarchy, and there was this desire to get away from that. So there's a lot of things, and that's way too much to unpack and way beyond our scope of expertise, frankly, about why that happened. But let's say one of the things was that men and women and society looked at that and said, okay, this doesn't work to have a woman in an apron cooking meals 3 times a day, all day, taking care of kids, and the man goes off to work, and when he comes home, he sits on the couch, reads the newspaper, drinks a bourbon, whatever, and the woman that's BS. I absolutely agree. But now, what are we left with? And are we exactly the same? No, I don't think we are. I think it is. It's at the margins. So yeah, we have a massive amount. 95, 97, 99% of the same, but it's on the margins that are different. Let me give you an example. So this is my opinion from what I've read and what I've observed as a father and also as a physician, that the genetics matter and the epigenetics matter and the anthropological manifestations of genetics and the way society evolves over time matter. And so I just think that on average, on balance, women are better, especially at early child care. They just come equipped with it. It's not that men can't be good and they can't develop, and they should, by the way, But I was just thinking about this last night and talking with my wife. And as you know, we've talked a lot, and Colin has been personally coaching me too through this transition, and is why I'm one of his biggest fans and
this work transition. Let's just be clear. We're talking
about
about some important
things here. That was beautiful. That was beautiful.
It's entrepreneurial journey my friend is going on here.
That is hilarious. Yes. My transition away from completely being dominated in work as a staff surgeon for a hospital to locum surgery plus other entrepreneurial ventures. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. That's awesome. And what has happened is I've spent more time at home, and I find myself completely lost at home oftentimes, and my wife gets frustrated, and fundamentally I've been able to figure out, and she said that I'm looking for direction because I don't know, and she is because I don't know, because I didn't grow up, I didn't come equipped, and also I've developed in this other way that she maybe has developed. It's multifactorial. I'm not trying to blame it all on just genetics, and so I said, I'm kind of like an intern, Morgan. Like, you got an intern. Like, I'm having to learn from scratch. I need help. And she feels like you should just know, and you should, and I want you to just know. I want to help her, and that's her definition of a helpmate, is somebody who just knows and fills in and does that. And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't come equipped with it. I think and I'm not using it as a cop out, because here's what a real man does. A real man doesn't use that as a cop out.
Sure.
A real man says, yeah, I might be different, but that doesn't absolve me of childcare. It doesn't absolve me to be a helper to my wife. I may think that I'm strong, and these patriarchal or even matriarchal ideals, right, of a woman only does this, or a man only does this, or a man a man should just come home and sit in the chair and drink a bourbon and read the newspaper. That's BS, man. But it doesn't mean you have to do exactly what your wife is, and you don't have to be exactly. You can be okay knowing you might not be the person that they run to when they're crying. They being the children, and my wife needs help, right? So am I going to be exactly like her? Nope. Am I going to do the same exact? But she's not even looking for that. I've since realized she's looking for me to be a helper, and that's a funny thing too. Was this servant leadership shift where a leader has to lead, and I know I'm going into so many realms here. I'm just kind of, but it was just it was so profound to me that if I don't know what's going on, but I can learn how to be a helper, and I can increase my value at home, and I can learn to get in the flow. Like maybe I don't have to be the actual giver of the bottle, although I do that and I can. But if I could at least start with making the bottle. If I see her get up, and the baby's crying, needs a bottle, I know how to make a bottle, and that's okay, right? It doesn't take away from my strength as a man that I do that. In fact, it increases my strength, that act of servant leadership. And so for me, all I'm saying is that as I realize that women are more the same, and they can inhabit those roles, and still it doesn't take away from their masculinity nor their femininity.
100%.
And what I've noticed is that it's very subtle, the differences. Like I might not be the best or primary giver of care of early childhood, or maybe I am, and maybe it's just going to be different than my wife,
sure,
right?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I know that was lengthy, but do you resonate with it? Does any of that resonate with you?
100%. And it comes down to our differences, and the reality is, if we appreciate one another's differences, we give our kids a broader scope of characteristics for them to grow from.
So true.
But if we are only, and shout out to all the single moms and the single dads that are holding it down.
Triple shout out,
because it is wildly difficult, certainly in our society and in our economy, to be able to hold it down. When you do have two parents in the home, to be able to appreciate one another and the differences is massive. Because if we were actually the same, we would only give our kids one perspective on
That's a good point.
on how to develop and how to grow. And so when you actually, I just see it as a team, and there's no basketball team that I've ever played for or watched that has all 6'2" Steph Currys. Like none of them. Because they need to complement each other.
Right.
And so as men and women, I believe that we were made to complement each other. And I think it happens differently in all kinds of partnerships and all kinds of different ways. Like what works for you and Morgan is different than what works for me and Laura.
Well,
and
for sure.
That's okay.
For sure.
Right? And I think we get pigeonholed into there is only one right way to do this, right? And I mean, you see it online so much, and through social media, there's people that are just spouting their opinions as though it's fact.
I know.
And if we don't dig in enough, then we won't really figure out what it means to us. So that's why we're doing this exercise too. It's because what a real man is to you is different than what it is to me. And for me growing up, what a real man is different than what it was for you.
But I also want to point out that there are similarities that bring us together and bind us together, because the only thing I fear too is when we say that there's differences, that's absolutely so incredibly true and important, but there's fundamental bedrock, because I fear this vacuum where nothing is fundamental and everything's relative. So when you said to me it was physically strong, emotionally strong, and relationally strong, I think that's a bedrock statement to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, absolutely, I can get on board with that. Now, how that manifests.
Sure.
So there's the genetics, and then there's the epigenetics, right? Or there's the genetic code, and then what gets transcribed and translated, right? So what I mean to say is you have this foundational bedrock statement. Now what it will look like in my life and mine and Morgan's life, may be different than you and Laura's life, but then somebody should be able to come along and say, oh, for them, this is that emotional part, and I see that emotional part over there, and then and they can see those foundational things.
But
and I love that.
The principle is still the same. It may manifest itself differently, but the principle is
and
still the same.
And that's okay that it manifests,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely, 100%. But yeah, that principle. I mean, you think about like how many men do we know that are wildly strong physically, but they're little boys emotionally.
God.
They're little boys mentally. And so when it comes down to it, it's this.
I was one, and so I can resonate. That resonates with me, and I don't, So, by the way, we're not pointing a finger at anybody, and we know who you are because this guy, was when I'll take that, I'll take that hit because I was there, and am learning every day.
Yeah.
So you're right.
And so when we look at that, we're like, okay, what's lost here?
Right.
And really, it's an education of how to grow. And right, I mean, because we know plenty of men who are also wildly emotionally strong and mentally strong and intellectually strong, yet on the physical side they're falling apart.
Right.
And so we want to be able to have this mix of both, but we have to educate ourselves and we have to work at it in order to grow in it.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, I want you to hit me with your second one, man.
Okay, so I had a funny thing happen, so I'm just going to roll with it. But I just started listing these, and then Morgan came up in the middle, and we kind of were looking at them together. And what I realized was, after all this talk about the old way and old school patriarchy and matriarchy and all these old school thoughts, it's funny how that stuff gets encoded in your mind. And I started writing things down. I'm like, oh, this is a trope. This is a meme. This is all the same stuff that we kind of rail against. But then again, maybe there's something in there. And so I was noticing that Morgan, off the top of her head, felt like some of these were similar. And so the next one I just wrote down was confident. Yeah. And then I keep looking at this lens, and we talked about this right in our previous podcast, where every time I say that, I then feel like I have to qualify that women. It's not that women can't be confident too.
Sure,
and that's so hard. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what's
no,
and
for
we
sure.
need that.
But you're talking, you're just talking about what you believe a real man to be.
Right.
Yeah.
So for a real man to operate in the world and move in the world, it's not that it's necessarily that's what a real man is for me, but it's more that it's absorbing that, taking that in, and developing that, and that leads to a more realness in your manhood.
Yeah.
Confident to be yourself, confident to wear the pink shirt, confident to take on some of these things that maybe aren't thought to be the way it has to be, for instance. But so confidence.
Yeah. So I mean, because if you take the other side of that, it's lacking confidence.
Right.
And then when a man is lacking confidence, is he going to make great decisions, or is he going to do the things that are necessary and not so much? So confident, makes a ton of sense. It's a big one. My second one is wise.
Ooh.
Wise.
Wait. W-I-S-E.
W-I-S-E.
Okay. Wise.
A place of
wisdom,
operating from a place of wisdom. And I think this one hits me because, experience in life is the best teacher if we're willing to learn. And if we're not willing to learn, then life will keep teaching us the same lesson over and over again.
So true. And
so I believe that a wise man learns from his mistakes, learns from his triumphs, is learning, and then operates from that place of wisdom. When I think about being wise, I don't think about being emotionally reactive or I think about just like a sage who just kind of in a confident way knows what to do.
Well, that does lead to confidence, I guess, right?
Knows how to react, doesn't panic, is calm.
Yeah.
So to me, wisdom is a real man holds wisdom. What you got for number 3?
I like that and I like that. I like it because too. Again, you see these fundamental things. So there's probably some kind of fundamental truth to what we're saying. We're describing it a little bit different because, like you pointed out, if you have that wisdom, that begets confidence, and I love that. And so Morgan, that was by the way, that was Morgan's first. That was her when I asked her just off the rip.
Yeah.
That was her first thing she came up with. Her second thing, and one that I wrote down too, was assertive. Not controlling, not dominating, not domineering, but assertive. Being able to posit your position in the world, being able to seek what you want in the world, not in an oppressive way, and that's what I love about at least what I conceive of is assertiveness. It's I will not shrink from telling you how I feel and where I stand on an issue, but I will do so in a manner that's different than just domineering or controlling or being oppressive. It leaves room for other opinions, but it also doesn't shrink away from what is your fundamental truth and your belief either. And there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's a very powerful thing.
It's essential.
It's essential if you're going to go out and get it wrong.
And I think in our super sensitive world, assertiveness gets mistaken for dominance.
Right.
When somebody is assertive and the other person is wildly passive, if that passive person can just claim being, oh, I'm the victim, they were just so over the top. Now look, dominance and disrespect for other people is shitty. Like
right,
that's
absolutely.
But assertiveness is important.
Right.
So I'm with you on that.
And I think as fathers too, or men teaching men. Go ahead.
Think of why you wouldn't be assertive.
If you hadn't developed, or
if you don't know what the fuck's going on,
right? Exactly,
right? Like why? Yeah. Like if you don't know what's going on, you are not going to be assertive,
right?
Like I think about my kids, and I'm like, hey, why don't you go ahead and do this? They're like, what? Yeah. They're doubting. They're not thinking they can do it. We lack assertiveness when we don't have confidence.
And I love that you're teaching them that, because now. My dad's, God bless his soul, is dead and gone. But I think when you don't have wisdom, when you don't have confidence, when you don't operate from the place of confidence, wisdom, mental strength, relational strength, you become insecure. And when you become insecure as a man, it manifests a little bit different sometimes than maybe a woman is prone to. Not again, they could not pigeonhole anybody, but in general, and it's this insecurity that then comes out as a need to control and a need to dominate.
Yes.
And so you use your natural male aggression, your testosterone, your strength in the absolute wrong way. And I saw that in my own family in a massive way. So I'm the firstborn, and of course I'm geared to try to please, and I'm looking at people for cues and things. And by the time I got to an age where it's really time to be assertive, right? Your teenage years and things, it was obliterated because of this massively controlling, dominant male figure, my father, just destroying all that, not on purpose. I don't think he ever consciously thought I'm gonna make this kid weak, or I'm gonna make this kid. In fact, feel weak, right? Because the funny thing was, he wanted a strong kid, but and so it's funny because if you don't have wisdom and you're not thinking through this, and you're not emotionally strong, boy, it's scary how quick you can fall into that as a default. And I see that in my own kids, and I've become more acutely aware of it. And when I'm trying to correct them or discipline them or get them on the right path, I have to constantly remind myself, like, whoa, are you, like, if they displease you and you start yelling, are you doing that to instruct them, or are you venting, or are you making yourself feel better?
Yeah.
That's selfish, right? And I don't want to do those things because I don't want to be selfish, and my kid is the wrong person to vent to. And what's most important is that I will potentially stunt their ability to
100%.
Achieve assertiveness.
Because if we are not operating from a place of wisdom, which I'll just be honest, many of us are not. Most of us are trying to just get through life,
right?
And we're just trying to make it. And so when we're not in touch and fit emotionally, and
we're not connected into a group that has a collective wisdom,
100%,
right?
Where we can grow together and learn together. Absolutely,
because that's what we were meant to do anyway.
Yes, and so when we as fathers, we don't realize that we are building a human.
That's right.
We're building a human,
That's
and we will fuck
said.
that up if we don't understand that. And
right.
so what components are we building them with? Are we building them with, when you get out of line, somebody's going to flip out on you?
Right.
What's that going to build into this little human?
Right.
the desire to not have somebody flip out on them because it's scary, and so then they won't be assertive.
They'll shrink away from responsibility,
They won't be assertive. They don't want to make mistakes.
Right.
And so how we react as parents is massive, men and women, right? It's really about leadership.
Right.
And so we have to absorb this idea that we need to deal with our own stuff, right? Because it's passed down from generation to generation. That's right, key. And we're becoming more aware. I believe psychology has been
pushed to the forefront.
Yes, it's been given more of its dues, its flowers, over the past 10 years.
Agreed.
And I think it's going even more so because we're understanding more of it, and so we're realizing how we develop as humans, and it's not just on a physical basis. And we're giving more power to the mental, emotional development of people, and so. In our day and age, the best thing that we can do as men is look to become emotionally fit and wise, so that our assertiveness it's used well,
right?
And it's not misused.
And I didn't have anybody necessarily to teach me this.
Yeah.
Had I had a group to plug into,
and I don't think guys our age had people to teach us this because it wasn't a thing for them,
right? And guys in younger generations will have. There are more of these things around, but you've got to avail yourself, and you got to be okay with accessing it. So there's another hurdle just because it's there. You know. So yeah. I kind of blanked out on what I was going to say, but I remember. Oh yeah, I remember thinking this kid. So I've got an interesting perspective because I got a 17-year-old all the way down to a getting close to 10-month-old. So I got this huge span, and I remember, the poor 17-year-old. We're gonna, I was still my first go round, right, first draft.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, it was almost like I looked at him sometimes when he was misbehaving as a horse that you had to break or something. Like I got to break this will. God, that was so wrong, man. That was so wrong. And luckily I caught it quick, but I still look back with regret, and I thought to myself, no, you're not strong. I'm strong, and I'm going to show you I'm strong because a man's strong, and I'm supposed to do that. I'm supposed to step in. That's what this kid needs is hard discipline. But and it's not that he didn't need discipline, and he didn't need to be allowed to run over people for sure. But that doesn't mean, again, if I had been more emotionally strong and relationally strong and had more wisdom because I sought it out and was engaging in introspection that maybe I thought wasn't really manly, and being purposeful and methodical and seeking it out, maybe I would have had that, but I didn't. And so what came out was more of like an anger or aggression.
Yeah.
And
and it's interesting because as we're raising our kids, man, it's what are we raising them for? If we're raising them for war,
right,
they've got to be tough as nails, physically strong, because we're raising them for war. So there was generations of our society that were raising Americans for war,
literally, because World War I, then World War II, and then the Korean War.
And shoot, our next.
So we should. So are you saying we should be aggressive? And
I think that we need to understand what we are teaching our kids. We are not just raising kids; we are teaching them. We are shaping them. And so, what are we shaping them for? If we are shaping them for war, then absolutely. Still, do you have to be emotionally fit? I believe so. But the reality is, if you go to war, the percentages of you coming back aren't really that high in terms of World War II and World War I. So there's a different lens of which men were being shaped. Mm. Now we have a society that we haven't seen a world war like that. Is one coming? Who knows?
It seems like you're right. The fourth turning is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we are trying. What are we shaping our kids for? Mm-hmm. Instead of thinking like, oh, I just need to get through the day without my kid dying, which I've definitely been there, right? As a dad, just survival mode. Yeah. What am I teaching him? What am I or her? What is it that I'm sharing with them so that they can also be assertive?
Right.
And emotionally fit and emotionally strong and physically strong and all the things that we're talking about. We've got to learn it so then we can teach them.
Absolutely.
Right?
What was your third one?
Number 3 for me encompasses honesty and authenticity. And honestly,
God, that's a great one for me.
I got to put courage on along with that.
Like
and the reason I put courage with that is courageous is because it is hard to be honest.
I say it's hard to do those things. So that's why, yeah.
It's really hard to be honest. It's really hard to be honest with ourselves. And if we can't be honest with ourselves, we can't be honest with other people. That's incredible. You just said that. I was literally telling my 17-year-old this week and asking about things that he wasn't doing and why, and trying to get him to think through, and realizing that if you say you're going to do something and then you're not doing it, it's a deception. I don't think it's too harsh to call it a lie, but it's definitely a deception, and I don't think that's anybody. I think everybody would agree with that, right? Yeah.
And I mean, barring unforeseen things or things that come your way to prevent it, but I mean, if you could have done it and you just didn't do it, and you said you were going to do it, right? And I said, and there was pushback, of course, and I said, well, you're either lying or you're lying to yourself about why couldn't you get this done, and why are you not doing the things you're saying you're going to do? Well, maybe you're lying to yourself. Maybe you don't really want to. And let's get real. I mean, if you don't want to do these things, then that's fine. You don't have to have some kind of arbitrary thing that you think I want you to do or be. But you can't say something that you're going to do something and not do it. You got to be true, and it starts with being true to yourself.
100%.
But you go.
But when we're young, we learn to lie because it gets us out of shit.
Dude,
it gets us out of trouble. It gets us out of heat. It gets us,
it's expedient.
Yeah, and so we learn to lie when we're young, and if that's not corrected, and if honesty is not valued as a virtue within our home, within our sports, it's one of the reasons I love golf so much. Is because look, if
talk about lying,
yeah, and you know why golfers lie? Because they hate that they suck.
Yeah.
So they don't like sucking. So they do the bullshit and cheat and move the ball and change the lie and don't count the stroke and do this thing because it makes them feel like they're a better golfer than they actually are.
Yeah.
And so It's why I love the game, but it's also a challenge every time that you step up to be a man of integrity.
Yeah.
Right? And so we learn to lie when we're young, and if we don't overcome that, then we just I know some fantastic liars. I know some people who are so good at lying that they don't even know they're lying. They're so wrapped up in the lies that they just keep telling. I don't think they know what reality is.
So is a real man honest, authentic, and courageous? And or is a real man committed to that, and to see that forward in his family as well? And I think it's both things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the honesty, to be honest, to be able to be honest with people, with other people, with care, because we also know some honest assholes, right?
Oh God, that's well said.
And
that's part of being emotionally strong too.
100%.
And you don't shrink from it because you're like, oh my God, I hurt their feelings. No, I'm going to be honest with you because you deserve that, but I'm going to do it with care. Yeah. You also deserve that.
And you're wise enough to be able to know how to articulate that.
Yep.
So that you can still be true to yourself while you're communicating with somebody.
Right.
Because when we lose that authentic part, we start to lose who we are. We get lost. And we don't honor ourselves and our ideas and our beliefs, and we don't honor those for fear of disappointing others or the discomfort of others. We lose who we are, and certainly we can't be a great man if we lose that.
And we lose that, but we also can then transmit through the generations the inability to find yourself.
100%.
So you lost yourself, and now the next generation can't find themselves because they don't know where to start. And I saw this in my own life where, and again, it's not blaming because one thing I found as a parent is like, holy cow, mom and dad, thank you so much.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's hard as hell. It's so freaking hard. Like, wow, you got to do this. You got to, oh gosh, like double thanks, triple thanks.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I know for a fact that there were times in my life when parental figures let me get away with stuff that they shouldn't let me get away with. And they picked up the pieces in a loving way, and then there weren't real consequences, and then that behavior gets reinforced, unfortunately. And then you said there's people that are fantastic liars. I lied. I began to this art of rationalization, lying to myself, and what happened is that later in life, when it really mattered, well, it always matters, but I mean, when it really mattered, and you're outside the protective nest of somebody who's going to pick up the pieces. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know how to, and the only thing I had was this maladaptive behavior of lying. That you're right. When you're a little kid, it was expedient and got you through, or it protected you, or so you thought. You bring that into adulthood, and it creates a mess, and it creates more destruction than you could ever imagine. So it's so incumbent upon us to have that wisdom and to be authentic and honest with ourselves, courageous to do so, and courageous to then hold our kids and our those that we are around to that standard.
Yeah, and when we do it, we can therefore teach it.
Gosh, it gives you the more authority to do it too.
Well, yeah, and
the know-how.
You can't teach what you don't know.
Exactly.
You can't give what you don't have.
Absolutely.
And so if you've been authentic, if you have the courage to be authentic, your kids will also be like, "Damn, Dad, you did that?
Yeah.
That was really bold. That was courageous."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Yes."
Or, man, Dad says to do this, and he does it too.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And yeah. Powerful stuff. All right, number 4 for you.
I put down tough.
Yeah.
And again, tough, strong, those just tough, basically. And so being able to take the hits, it's kind of what you kind of already talked about up top on your list. Being able to be there for your family, to take that hit. How many hits? I mean, this quote from Rocky, life's not about how hard you hit, but how hard you can get hit and get back up. So that always resonated with me, because if I were to, at this point in my development as a man, if I were to teach somebody else how to develop as a man, I would tell them that that's what it's about. It's not about how again, not how hard you can hit, but how hard you can get hit and keep going.
It's a level of resilience.
Resilience. That's even so much better, actually. I'm going to write that down. So that was my 4. What was your 4?
Kind of piggybacking off my other one was aware of self and others. I think know thyself, right?
Yeah.
I think is so important, because it's almost like if we don't know ourselves, we're chameleons. We can get really good at shape shifting and changing for whomever we are around. And if that's the case, then we have no foundation of which we're establishing beliefs and values in order for us to be a great man. Everything's always moving. It's just a moving target. And it's not only is it important for us to be self-aware, but we have to be aware of others. We have to be aware of others' emotional states. We have to be aware of others, certainly in our core group, our family, our closest friends, even our coworkers. We have to be aware of their relationships, even sometimes their upbringing and their patterns of thinking. And because if we're only taking our self-awareness to everybody else, then maybe we just try to get everybody to think like us or talk like us or do like us, right? So self-awareness can also be this high horse that people can get on,
absolutely,
right? And so I think the awareness piece is massive, self-aware, but others aware as well.
But maybe if you're truly being self-aware, you are then through that develop respect for others, because it sounded like that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's I know plenty of people that are self-aware and they live in this bubble.
Yeah.
As though their self-awareness is some sort of righteousness that other people can't touch or that other people should just acclimate to.
Right.
And I don't believe that that's the purpose of self-awareness. So what you were getting at, is developing a self-respect and then a respect for others.
Yeah.
It's and I think that's why my number 3 was honesty. You can't get to self-awareness if you don't have any honesty with yourself, if things are always shifting.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah. Number 5, what you got?
5, I wrote down in control. And then from that, I started to kind of want to flesh out and think more about that. To me, it really means more like self-control and responsibility, taking on responsibility. And that beget to me the idea of doing the right thing. And Morgan, I was sharing this with her, and she was saying, yeah, it sounds like what you're describing is a man's role, maybe in his family or otherwise, as a pillar of strength. And it was really interesting to her. She said one of the things that made her think of a real man was vulnerability. And she said, she goes, let's go Brene Brown. Let's go Brene Brown on it. I said, yeah, I got you. I'm tracking you. I love Brene Brown. And it was really interesting because if I'm thinking in control, pillar of strength, I'm not necessarily thinking vulnerability. Most people probably wouldn't initially. But then if I expand out further to responsibility and doing the right thing, to her, it meant not that somebody was vulnerable as in they could be hurt. Well, they were entering spaces in which they could be hurt, and doing so from a position of strength, assertiveness to actively move into that space, not becoming vulnerable as ineffectual, not becoming vulnerable as in purposely weakening themselves,
Sure.
but just allowing yourself to go to a place in which you could be hurt or where the risks were a little high. And so I thought of this quote that I heard on a podcast. It was a young guy saying it, and I think it was meant detrimental, but it kind of spun off all these other thoughts for me. And he said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, I don't even know who it was. It's just in my memory. I said like something like a man's role, or your role as a man, is to be the rock which your wife's wave of emotion must be allowed to crash against, or something like that. And my wife, that resonated with her, and she liked the idea, which surprised me. She wasn't offended by it. I thought she kind of would be offended by it. And that's where, so from that we then started talking, and we thought to ourselves, this was a team effort. And I really actually want to see what you thought about this, because a lot of times early on in our marriage, I felt like I could feel that wave of emotion coming, or I would see it in other realms in my life or other situations in my life, and I would avoid it or deflect it. And I did it in the name of, I'm not emotional. I'm not going to get all crazy, and I'm not going to engage in that because I'm a strong man and I don't need to be like that. But what happens is you ignore the situation, and you become you start to deflect. Or one thing you might do is try to change course and not listen. I learned that I wasn't listening, and I was quickly trying to jump to a solution, and my wife didn't want that. And one thing that we always talk about is, we'll say, is this a nail in the head moment? And it's a cue to say, is this a situation in which I'm supposed to listen, or a situation in which you want to fix? And so the funny thing about that is, there's this video that used to circulate on Facebook years ago. Producer Nick, can you get that video? I don't know. I would type something like nail in the head. Woman puts nail, has a nail in the head. Something, talks to man. Yeah, there you go. YouTube. It's not about the nail. So pull that up. Let's just watch that real quick. I think it's like a minute and a half long or something like that. If we can just pause. I know we're kind of running short on time, but I just want to show you this, because from this, I had some other more profound thoughts, or at least I think so. We'll run them by you and see what you think. Go ahead. Hit play there. This is kind of funny. Turn that up a little bit if you can.
And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
You do have a nail in your head.
It is not.
Are you sure? Because
You always do this.
Okay, you can stop it there, producer Nick. Thank you so much. So, but it was funny. Like that is funny, and it is making light of a situation that we do find ourselves in when maybe sometimes, maybe you've seen this with Laura. I don't know, and then I started, but that was so. At first, it was a funny thing we talked about. Then it was something I kind of would make fun of my wife about, so to speak, or I would tease her about, and I kind of thought, oh, I don't have to deal with this, or I don't have to deal with these emotions, or why don't we just find a solution and move on? And what I've now realized is if I engage in doing the right thing because I'm in a state of self-control, because it literally I have to take a breath, pause. I don't naturally want to go there, but sometimes you have to do the things that you don't want to do the right thing, or the things that don't feel comfortable to do the right thing, and certainly if you want to grow. And then I realized, what was I doing before? I was trying to solve so I could deflect and move on, or I was trying to make fun of so I could deflect and move on, or I was trying, because I didn't want to be vulnerable to bring myself into that position to be caught up in that emotion, and because I'm a man and I'm not emotional, and I don't need to when that was actually the furthest from the truth. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe this rock that the waves are crashing against maybe that rock is not a deflector, but a diffuser. It helps kind of neutralize it, and that's its role. And then the water thereafter kind of calms down, right? The water beyond the rock. Or even better said, maybe it's a way that you, and I started thinking about this with people that have fear and people that are doing wrong with you or by you or that you have trouble with. If you're, one way to not be vulnerable is to say, put up a wall and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And in fact, I'll fight you, and I'll deflect you, I'll push you away. But I started thinking about this, that for me, it was, I was like, it's way harder to open your arms and say, no, come here. Like to my wife, you got a nail in your head. I want to tell you that. I want to show you the solution to it. But that's not what you need.
Yep.
I'm now developing wisdom. I'm now developing emotional strength, relational strength, like you talked about, because I'm on this path of becoming a better man. I'm engaging this project to be a better man, and I know I need to do those things. I'm going to now, instead of deflecting in humor, deflecting in calling you crazy or whatever it is, or saying that I'm going to be vulnerable. Come here. I'm going to exhibit self-control. I'm going to put my thoughts aside, or that urge to be impulsive and not want to deal with it, and I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to be vulnerable, and now I'm going to absorb it. My wife needs that. She needs me to absorb that emotion with her. It's a calming, and it shows love. And then once you've absorbed it, now the interesting thing is maybe that solves it. Maybe that takes the nail out of the head. Just need a shoulder to lean on, shoulder to cry on. Or maybe you can get to a point where you can talk more about it. Now, you may not agree with any of that, but I was curious to see, because to me that was profound.
Yeah, a couple of things. With the what your partner needs,
Mm-hmm.
it's being aware and being willing to love your partner enough to give them what they need,
right,
instead of you wanting to do what you want to do.
Exactly.
Because it's uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable for us as men,
yes,
to listen and not fix.
Right.
And my wife is getting so good at communicating with me. She's like, I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to listen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that you just told me that, because now I've got my marching orders.
That's right.
This is fantastic.
Yes,
so
I've got a nail in my head, but I just need you to listen.
Yeah. And so we've certainly gone down that path and learning.
But did you have to consciously?
100%.
Yes,
Yes,
you,
that is
you have
not
to learn that, right?
Oh my gosh,
Yes.
yes. And I learned it by messing up plenty of
Yes.
times to
Guilty.
but also the fact that
But you were
I
committed.
wanted to
better.
yeah, I wanted to be better. Going to that vulnerability piece, vulnerability is huge, and Brene Brown is like the lead studier of vulnerability. To me, vulnerability gets jacked up a little bit, because really, in my mind, vulnerability is the unveiling of truth.
God, Nick,
vulnerability is
you
the
need to capture
unveiling
that.
of truth,
That's a
because here's the
dime
thing:
right there. That's
we do not
unveiling of
want
truth.
to unveil the truth when we are in battle. Because when we're in battle, if you look at sports,
God.
you don't want the other team to work on your weaknesses. You don't want them to take advantage of your weaknesses. So what do? You try to hide them, and then you focus on your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when you're in competition. That's when you're in
Right.
battle. You're trying to hide your weaknesses
Yeah.
so they don't get exploited. Well, too often we think the same thing goes for relationships.
Jeez.
And so we don't go to this unveiling of truth because we think that we will be exploited because of it. And
Right.
honestly, in some relationships, it is the case, right? Where you unveil a feeling or a truth as a man and it is held against you,
Absolutely.
right, in a fight or in an emotional blow up,
Absolutely.
right? And so it creates this, how do I actually expose the truth because it makes me feel weak, or am I strong enough, am I emotionally fit enough to be able to understand that vulnerability creates connection within relationship?
God, that's great, man.
Vulnerability creates connection, and if we don't have a vulnerability, then we always have this chasm between who we are with somebody else.
Right.
Now, it's okay because we don't have everybody in our inner circle. We don't need to be vulnerable with everybody.
Right.
Like that's just setting ourselves up for failure.
Absolutely. And there's some people that do that by default.
Yes.
And I think it's an ulterior motive for attention. And we're not talking about attention, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think some people do it because, honestly, they don't have a piece of wisdom that understands how they're
Right.
presenting themselves to other
Or
people.
maybe that's, yeah.
Right? But when it comes to us and our kids and our wives and even our close coworkers,
Circle, right,
our,
yeah.
our inner circle, we have to be able to be vulnerable because it
Absolutely.
creates connection.
God.
And from connection creates trust. From trust
Ah,
builds loyalty and more
Jeez.
of these things that just create a really good life, to be able to
Right.
have relationships where you have trust and loyalty and friendship and
yeah, but Colin, that is so huge what you just hit on. Vulnerability creates connection. Connection creates trust, and it does create a good life. But if you're a business owner out there, and Colin owns a business, multiple businesses. In fact, I own multiple businesses, and I'm not saying that we're some big highfalutin CEOs, but we know what that means to own a business and have employees. If you unveil truth and you're vulnerable, you do create a connection with your clients, your customers, your patients. You create a connection, and that creates trust. And what better way to be a business leader, develop your business, to excel in business? I don't know of a better way off the top of my head, and this has certainly got to be one of the top 3 best ways. Would you agree with that?
absolutely. Yeah.
That's
and-
fundamental. It's
yeah.
fun. It's funny how that transcends different arenas that we are in. It's almost like, well, in our life, I guess these arenas overlap like Venn diagrams, right? So it's a really cool concept to learn because it'll affect your home life, but also your business life,
Yeah.
make you a better father, man, business owner, potentially other things too.
Absolutely. And the hardest part about that vulnerability piece is the reality is you're going to get hurt.
Yeah, that's true.
When you unveil
Yeah.
the truth and you're honest about your feelings or your emotions or whatever, the reality is that you're going to get hurt.
Right.
Well, when you're playing a sport and you put yourself out there, the reality is
That's
you're
true.
going to get hurt.
That's true.
You still play the sport because you love the sport and you want to continue to grow and play
And you wanna be your
enjoy
best.
it. You want to be your best. So you're still putting yourself out there, understanding that there's possible consequences that could hurt you, right? And so we get so fearful when it comes to our relationships that we don't want to expose ourselves to getting hurt, but it's part of loving.
That's right.
It's part of growing with somebody. And so
So maybe it's kind of like, I know we were talking about that quote by Vyskov, Dr. David Vyskov. I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a risk. It's a calculated risk. It's
100%.
So if you can't risk, you can't grow. If you can't grow, you can't become your best. If you can't become your best, you can't be happy. And if you can't be happy, what else matters? So that's what, I don't know. When you were saying that, that's what kind of resonated.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about an athlete who maybe in college, let's say they're going to go in the draft that year or the next year or something, and it's down to the end of the game, and they got to they feel tired, or they're, and I'm not saying to be stupid, of course, not to be reckless. I'm not saying that, but every time that you could conserve, I'm going to go to the draft, I'm going to do this, but maybe it's a national championship game or a rivalry game, or I mean, as a former D1 athlete, this might resonate with you. You can play it safe, but you may not be happy. You may not become your best. You may not grow if you
100%.
risk. And so being vulnerable I
It's
don't know.
absolutely
that
a
spoke
risk.
that resonated with me
Yeah.
greatly. What was your number 5?
Number 5, we're going to wrap it up on this. Always pursuing, growing, never finished.
I love that.
So it's not even that we
Constant.
reach this pinnacle of, oh, we're a real
I'm a real
man.
man. Yeah.
You know, it just reminds me of Pinocchio. I'm a real boy.
I know, exactly.
So it's not that we climb the mountain and we're on the top and we're finished, right? It's that we climb the mountain, we've grown, and we're like, oh, we see over there's another mountain to climb, right? And it's a continual growth and pursuit of growth and development.
So being a real man means to you a commitment to continuous self-development, continuous giving to others, continuous pouring into your community, pouring into your family, pouring into the people at work, becoming better yourself, and that never stops.
100%.
I agree. 100. What better way to end this?
Yeah. Now, this has been a great episode. We are now going to pass it to you guys and say, look, hey, what are the things that you resonate with as a real man? Write them down. Keep them with you. Let them guide what you're doing as you continue to try to grow and develop as a man. So it's really important that you write those down. You know
what?
Yeah.
One thing I would say is actually in the spirit of growing ourselves and continuously growing, being vulnerable, and developing our own emotional, relational wisdom and things like that. Why don't you guys drop them in the comment section below?
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually would love to hear what you guys think and see. Colin probably has a lot of this. By the way, in terms of the breakout sessions that he hosts with the BetterMen Project and the BetterMen groups, and I don't always get to be there and see that. I would love for you guys to connect with us on social media, and so in the comment section, if this drops on, well, this will drop on IG, or if you want to put it down in the comment section down below on YouTube, we'd love to hear what you guys think, and maybe we could even respond to some of that. What do you think?
Absolutely, that's beautiful. And as always, we didn't finish the first 2 episodes with this, but something that we finish our retreats and our small groups. Your best days are ahead of you. Believe that your best days are ahead of you.
Absolutely.
It gives you a sense of direction.
I love it. See you next time, man.
All right.
All right.